All right, next we're going to talk about accidentals and borrowed chords. Basically, very simply, you understand key and what playing in key means. So you're playing in C and you decide to use one of these black notes, a sharp or a flat. While you're playing in the key of C, you're going to use that in a chord or in your melody. And so you've used an accidental or a borrowed chord. That means that your melody is using one of these notes, or your chord, you decide to say, well, you're going to play an E major in the key of C, that it's not going to fit in that key, and it's going to use notes outside of the key. So it's a borrowed chord, and it just has to be notated. The notes in the chord that aren't in the scale, or the notes in the melody that aren't in the scale, have to be notated in the notation as sharp or flat or a natural, depending on what the key signature is and what notes you're using in that key. And it's that simple. Try to keep it that simple in your mind. All right, articulations. Articulation is another one that can be very complex, but a simple understanding of an articulation is that basically in music, when you write down it's been written down or anything, that it's written very basically a lot of times, to where you've got a C note written. And, it can be, it can be a bass part that the guy's slapping on the bass, or he's plucking a string real hard, or a sliding, or doing some type of bend thing, and that's can all be an articulation. How the actual instrument is voiced. Normally that works out to an articulation, or very simple understanding of it. So anytime the note's just not being hit, and that's it, it's just straightforward and straight, and just you hit a C note. Anything else going on to it, or they're trying to do to it, that's expression or anything other kind of thing that, anything that's going to be not just hitting that string or voicing it any differently, a lot of times that's just going to be looked at as an articulation. Bends and slides and thumping and slapping and plucking it differently. All those kind of things can be different types of articulations. So try to keep that simple in your mind. All right, expression. Expression can be very simply that we have talked about that, sometimes music is written very statically and very, it looks very, clinical, it doesn't look like it has all this expression and all this stuff going on. The articulations and, all kinds of things that, make the music sound alive. And expression is one of those things, and it can be really simple. That you can be holding a note a little bit longer than the music says, or doing vibrato, or any type of thing that you might be doing that is, if you understand that you take any type of music and you add any type of your own expression to it that changes it in any way from just the static composition, that's a type of an expression. So try to keep that very simple in your mind. All right, modulations. We're going to talk about two different types of modulations. The first type of modulation, and normally what you're speaking about when you're talking about music, is if you're playing in the key of C and you decide to change to the key of A, and you've just modulated to the key of A, or you're playing in C and you decide to modulate to key of E. Now you've changed keys, and basically it's that simple. There's different ways to change keys. You might go from C, you're playing in C, and all of a sudden you're going to go to play E, so you go to the D sharp and you form some chord off it, or just a note off it or something. Or you might do a couple different things that are progression of a change that are leading into that change, into that modulation, that are actually part of the transition of that modulation into another key. And just try to keep that simple in your head. And the other type of modulation is what you probably already understand, is modulation and frequency. And if you look at a spectrogram and the frequencies modulating back and forth from the guy singing or doing bends on it, or their vocals, and it's modulating in frequency back and forth, up or down. That's one type of modulation. And the other modulation is modulating in decibel level, up or down. And try to keep it that simple in your head. Another thing is, I want you to Google equal temperament tuning and concert tunings, and just look at those. There's lots of different tunings, and you can investigate into that a little bit, but just look at those two things so you have an understanding what that is and the basic concept of that. It won't take you long, but you're going to have to do a little bit of reading on that to understand it, and I'm not going to get that in depth into it, but you're going to want to have at least some level of understanding of what that is. All right, form or structure or genre. Those things are very interrelated. So let's take a very simple example that you should be able to understand no matter what you're doing. Is that, okay, a blues rock 1-4-5, first interval, fourth interval, fifth interval. That's a very prime example of a form or structure that can be very much related to a genre. And that's a very simple example, and keep it that simple in your head, that's a form or a structure. And that form or structure is going to repeat, or a different form of structure is going to progress to, and then it's going to have a different form of structure, and a different form of structure might regress back to that form or structure. And that becomes, each one of those little individual structures are going to be create a larger form or structure. You can get very in depth into that. A prime example to make it real easy to understand is a basic rock song or something. You've got an intro, you've got the verse, you've got chorus, you've got intro, you've got verse again, chorus, bridge, lead. You've got another chorus, another verse, and then you've got an ending. And that's a form and structure. That is a very pertinent form and structure in music. And there's lots of them. But trying to keep it that simple in your head, because you can get into sonatas, and you can just go on and on and on trying to understand forms and structure, which it wouldn't hurt you to look into it a little bit, but just the basic understanding of that's what you're talking about. So that when somebody's talking about form or structure, genre is the same thing, because basically the form and structure of like reggae music or some types of pop music that are very, specific in sound, sometimes nowadays those lines can get very blurred, but, a lot of times that those structures in certain genres are very set. That structure may vary, they might put some other short structure inside of that song somewhere. But the basic structure is repetitive, and it's a standardized, is I guess a good way to put that. And then it becomes standardized as this genre, and that's a real easy way to look at it, and trying to keep it that simple in your mind. That way, if you're ever having to think about it, or you want to investigate what is the structure of reggae, that with that understanding of what you're looking for and those changes and how those structures are put together, make it a lot easier for you to look at it and understand it. But at least you have some understanding of what we're talking about. So when someone says sonata, that that it's some structures that are going A to B to C to A again to B to C again. And, that's the structure of the song. And, it's a set structure, and then it gets stamped with a name for a structure and a form of type of a music. And just with that first example I gave you is a prime example of that, of exactly what that means. And each one of the parts can be structures in themselves. And just try to keep that real simple in your mind, because we're just addressing basics, and it's that simple. So just try to keep it that simple in your mind. All right, analysis of any type of music that's going on. And trying to keep this simple also is that basically you're trying to the real simple understanding of that is you're trying to decompose a piece of music till you can look at smaller pieces to understand the larger complexity that the piece of work is, so that you can, try to define its form and structure, its characteristics, aspects of it to be related to some type of genre or some type of form or some type of era or some type of progression of chordal progressions or melodic progressions. And trying to keep that real simple in your mind, that it's basically just a deconstruction to start looking at the smaller components and how it's put together into a larger complex, composition. And trying to keep it that simple in your mind. Any of these subjects you can really dig into, but it's that simple of decomposing the piece of work to try to re-put it back together to understand how that all the smaller complexities and basics work out to larger complexities in the structure and form of the actual music. All right, pitch. Pitch is real simple. Pitch is the lowest or highness of a tone. The lowness or highness of a tone. it's that simple when somebody's talking to you about pitch, that what the pitch is. Is it middle C? Is it the C above middle C? Is it the C below middle C? Where is it at, as far as in the frequency spectrum? Where is the pitch located, and that's a very simple understanding, very basic explanation, but basically that's what it is. All right, I hope I made those subjects fairly basic to understand and easy to understand, and I expect that if you're really studying music theory, and it's just not apt to apply to the things we're going to be talking about, that you dig into those. But I hope that at least opens the door so you understand they exist, and that you've got some direction to go look at and look in, and some things to evaluate and take some time evaluating what they mean and how they are going to be pertinent in what you're trying to do. But that just kind of gives you some direction and basic outline of some of those subjects. And we're going to talk about what this all means.